We're talking about unchecked aggression here,
What the
dude.
fuck is he talking
My
about?
rug.
Forget it, Donnie. You're out of your element.
Walter, the Chinaman who peed on my rug, I can't go give him a bill.
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it's time to have a look at some answers from the developers. It seems like they've covered pretty much all bases today, and therefore that's why I've got a bunch of tabs open to have a talk about different things that are discussed in the Q&A. But before we get started, I'd just like to let you know on the Tech Hub Discord, where there's a link in the description of this video that you can see, there is a giveaway going on for the destroyer for the Japanese. So the premium rank 3 destroyer, the pack which is with that, the Kiyashimo. So please go check that out on the Discord so you can enter. There's 3 days left on it. It's got a decent amount of people involved, but make sure that you enter for your chance to win the giveaway. So let's go through this Q&A. It's done by BVVD, or Vyacheslav Bulanikov, who is the War Thunder producer, and it goes through armored vehicles, aircraft, helicopters, naval stuff as well, and also other. There's a lot to this one, so I'm very happy to be able to go through it. So the first thing is, the first question I should say, is do you plan to add any upgrade packages, modifications, for the M1A1 or the Challenger 2, such as the M1A1HA or the Challenger 2 Theater Entry Standard kits, or maybe even the Megatron modification, perhaps as separate machines entirely? The answer is, we are not excluding additional modifications for British and American tanks, including protection modules. However, later versions of the Challenger 2, such as the Megatron, if they are added, will most likely be introduced as separate vehicles. So it's kind of interesting with this, right? Because we have precedent for both areas of the game. If you have a look at the Challengers that we have, you have the Challenger Mark II and the Challenger Mark III, I believe, if we just have a look quickly. When you have a look in the tech tree, you have the Challenger Mark II, the Challenger Mark III, and then you've got the Chieftain Mark III and the Chieftain Mark V. Both of these are, the Mark III and the Mark V are incredibly similar, but the Mark II and the Mark III are even more similar. The only real difference is the external, I suppose, the armor differences between them, the external package. So that would be seen as one of these modifications, apart from it's done in a completely separate vehicle. Then you've got machines like the Warrior or the BMP-2, which have additional armor protection packages built into modifications. And also, as I said, you have it with the BMP-2. You also had it with other stuff such as like the IS-2, which gets the external armor and stuff like that, and also the Shermans. But as you can see with the BMP-2, you have the BMP-2D upgrade, which gives you extra armor. So there are precedents for both here. There are precedents for the idea of adding them as a separate vehicle, and also adding them just as a modification. Now, I think it comes down to whether you need to fill out a lineup or not. And if we have a look at the top tier of the Americans, you've got the M1, the M1IP, and the M1A1. Now, if you really wanted to flesh that lineup out, you would add in an M1A1HA, which stands for Heavy Armor, which is the DU inserts in the armor itself. And what you would do is add that in to fill out the lineup. So you'd have the ADATs and the 2 MBTs, so you would have to drop like the M1IP and add in this M1A1HA. This would make the lineup incredibly strong compared to what it was before. And the same with the Challenger 2, if you decided to add in another modification of it. It just means that you have an extra option if something goes wrong at top tier. And normally this is something that I've talked about quite a lot. What we need to have at top tier is parity of mechanics, and that means types of vehicles. It also means, stuff like everyone has to get helicopters. Also, everyone has to get at least maybe 1 or 2 MBTs at the top tier. And then you start having to have conversations of what is a good MBT at top tier, what is a bad one, and, are the nations starting to get to that point? Because I think they are, right? You got the Leclerc, the MX-40, you've got the Challenger 2 and the Challenger 1. So is it needed for these to be separate vehicles or additions to vehicles that are already existing, because these, the TES, right, or TES as it's known for the Challenger 2, the Theatre Entry Standard kits, this is what it should have on it anyway, right? You'll hear a lot of people talk about the missing facets of the Challenger 2 in game right now, and they're not wrong. You know, there is a lot of stuff which is missing off the Challenger 2, which should already be there, but it obviously hasn't been put onto it, so they can create another Challenger 2 down the line, because otherwise they run out of vehicles for top tier for Britain. And you can understand, you know, why they're doing it, but in the short term it's going to annoy people, because they say, well, if you're going into battle with the Challenger 2, you would not go in this naked sense, and you know, they're completely right, but at least it means down the line there'll be a Challenger 2 which is a little bit better and at that theatre entry standard level. The overall other thing as well, though, which we do have to think about if you are on the side of the modification idea, you know, being able to have, like, let's just say DU inserts as an upgrade for a modification. Remember that a battle rating, or at least it seems to be, is based off of a vehicle which is fully kitted out. You know, it has all of its modifications, and we're already seeing, especially with a lot of vehicles, the BMP-1 is a good example of this. We're seeing modifications being added which completely change how a vehicle is used. So I'm running medium graphics, by the way, on this, but the BMP-1, if you have not got the missile upgrade, which is the BMP-1P, you know, if you uninstall this, you only have access to the 9M14 missile. Now, this is a keyboard-controlled missile, it's hand-aimed, and it only pens 400. This, the 9M113, pens 600, is mouse-aimed, and is just a much better system. Let's put it like that. It's a hell of a lot better than you have before. You can see this is the first missile, and then on top of this as well, by adding in the BMP-1P brackets, you also get access to smoke grenades. So this is a huge upgrade for the BMP-1 that you see in game. Now, I think it's actually too much of an upgrade. I would like it to be a separate vehicle alongside, you know, other machines that are around. I would be fine with having a BMP-1 and a BMP-1P, because if the standard BMP-1 with the not as good ATGM is doing awfully, but then this one with the Conker's ATGM is doing well, you are going to struggle to spade this thing, because the BR doesn't change from, you know, when it is stock to when it is spaded. And I am an advocate for the idea of a stock vehicle having a different BR to a spaded vehicle, but since that is not the case in the game, what we have to do is try and minimize the difference between a stock and spaded vehicle, and you can't do that if you're adding in modifications which add in full different sets of armor and also completely different, you know, ammunition and stuff like that. And also on top of this idea, you've also got to think about, well, if I'm facing that machine, I always have to think about if it's like fully kitted out, because if I don't think like that, then if I run into one which is fully kitted out, it's going to annihilate me. If you want to just see a few things, so this is technically the Megatron upgrade. The TES system, which it talks about, it was developed to increase protection of the tank against tandem warheads and also IEDs, so improved explosive devices, and also you can see it has a mobile camouflage system on it, so it looks really cool. I can definitely see this coming to the game, you know, at some point. And then this is another picture of it that you can see here with the beautiful kind of just camouflage on it. So yeah, the M1A1HA as well is this machine. It's just an M1A1 with DU inserts in it, making it a little bit more beefy when it comes to being hit. And I would be surprised if we see the HA before we see the M1A2 in game. The next question is there a SAM anti-air plan for Italy and Japan? The answer, yes. We have plans for Italian and Japanese air defense systems. So one of the interesting things is, as I've said, I've talked about for years, parity of mechanics is very important to me. If you are going to give one nation one thing, you have to at least try and give a majority of nations the same type of mechanic. The reason to do this is otherwise you end up with a scenario what we had about a year ago at this point, which is where the Americans had all of the toys, and what it meant was, why would I play any other nation? Actually, maybe it was around about September, October of 2017, because that was when helicopters came out and hit the ground running. The Americans had probably the best top-tier MBT. Some would argue that, but the statistics show it was the best. The AH-1Z was also around the place, absolutely annihilating anything that moved. Had a pretty good top-tier AA in the form of the Sergeant York. You also had, well, not at the time, but you had, the Bradley coming out, so there's another mechanic, which, the scouting mechanic and the ATGM mechanic that you could use. So there was a lot of stuff that had come out which made the Abrams incredibly good, and also made the Americans incredibly good. And it gets to a point where you start thinking as a player, why am I playing any other nation? Why not just play this one nation that has all of the toys? Also, you got to remember the F-100 and also the Sabres. So with that said, and also the FJ4B with its bullpups, before other nations got AGMs. That was a thing after Operation Summer, or the good old summer event, I should say. So America had all of the toys, and it was very hard to rationalize playing any other nation at top tier because America had all of the toys. Now, over the last year or so, we've seen other nations get some of the toys. We had the wonderful Tunguska, which now, luckily, a lot of other nations have these AA machines as well. We also have every nation having at least one top-tier MBT, which is competitive at high tiers. We see more helicopters across the board. It's not fully done yet, but it's getting there. We have more nations with supersonic jets, so now we have much more of a parity between nations, and I think that is a general improvement if we just talk about general game balance, because a lot of people ask me about, well, what do I think about the Challenger versus the Leopard or something like that. And my first question is, well, the Germans have access to helicopters and the British don't, so what is the point in talking about a context of one vehicle versus another when, if you look at the overall battlefield or the operation, one side has more tools in their toolbox than the other. So that side can deal with a lot more situations than you can, therefore there's not a lot you can do, right? Unless you have a generic counter to that, which is what we've seen in the last update. So for me, it is a positive, push forward that we've had in War Thunder when it comes to these ideas, and I'm hoping that soon, we get full the same mechanics across the board for everyone. And this would be a step in that direction, because everyone else has a SAM, or a SAM anti-air machine at top tier, apart from Japan and Italy. Italy have the automatic, so it's pretty good, but Japan are kind of left in their whim. So I had a look at SAM systems that nations used. So this is one of the Japanese ones. This is known as the Kokadosha, which is a military version of a Toyota Mega Cruiser, and it could carry a total of 8 missiles which were ready to fire, and it used the Type 93 surface-to-air missile, which is an infrared homing missile. This to me is the closest one to what we could see in War Thunder. The reason is because the other ones are a little bit bulky, and it's probably the closest to something like a Striker, where it doesn't have like a main armament. The Striker obviously has the 7.62 on it, but wait, why am I looking at the Striker? I meant the Stormer. There we go. yeah, the Stormer which fires the Starstreak. There is no main armament on it, apart from the missiles themselves, so we already have precedent for a machine like this in game. So for me, I've got a feeling that this is going to be the Japanese option. The other ones, you've got some big, more like heavy hitters. This is the Type 81 SAM launcher. The problem with this is that it requires two vehicles. You need this vehicle, and then you need a fire control system vehicle, which looks like this. And they have to be around less than 300 meters apart, and the radar itself, which is obviously on the fire control systems vehicle, has a range of about 30 kilometers and also has built-in IFF capabilities, which is just kind of crazy. The way it actually works, this tandem system, let's call it, is actually really cool with the Type 81 SAM launcher. So an intercept course is computed for the missile from the FCS system, and the missile itself is launched, and then the missile follows the initial inertial course until it reaches a pre-programmed point, and then it activates its infrared seeker, but it only activates it looking at the sky, so it doesn't, hit the sun or anything like that. So pretty much this machine is designed to get the missile into proximity of the target, and then the infrared seeker does the rest. Now, if they wanted to get rid of the realistic aspect, you could technically just put this machine in game and use it just by itself to shoot down aircraft. But the thing is, I think a lot of people would complain because it is, as I said, a tandem system. So therefore, why not just add the Kokidosha, which looks a lot more fun. It should be a lot more fun and a lot more mobile. The Italians, it's a little bit harder. So at least from my, preliminary looking at this stuff, there seems to be, the Italians do a lot of stationary SAM sites, especially on the naval stuff, and one of these systems is the Spada 2000, which holds, as you can see, 6 missiles. This is used by many different nations, such as the Pakistanis, but you can see that it is drivable. It is road safe. You can move it around. But the thing is, this is the main one that I've personally found, and it seems more like a SAM site than a mobile SAM system. So if you have any ideas of what the Italians could get, please leave them in the comments so I can have a look and get used to what we might be seeing in the game. The next one is, the next question I should say, is you have already implemented the mechanics of changing vehicle construction, raising armor shields. Do you plan to develop it further, for example, by connecting the Kami floating rafts? The answer is maybe, but not in any nearest plans. So, if you don't know, machines like the BMP, which are let's see here. If you go into the water, since this thing is, since this thing can go into the water, this little area here acts as a guard for the water, so it flips over and hits the water, and kind of keeps the wave down in front of it. You can see it a little bit more pronounced on the BMP2. But yeah, this area here, it just flips over. If you have this machine, I'd say go and test it. It's actually really cool. And that's basically what they're talking about. Now, the Kami is a completely different kettle of fish to that idea. The Kami is not very good. I mean, for me, it's Panchito, or the fighting cock. But the main thing from the Kami is that it's missing some of its essential functionality, which made it what it was in World War II. And that was its floatability, shall we call it, or, something like that. This is the Kami, what it's supposed to look like. As you can see, it has 2 little areas added onto it. You've got this area here, and then you've got this area here. It also has extended viewports on the top and an extended exhaust system, which you can find here, but it's just extended upwards. And this made it completely amphibious. It was actually used for stuff like coastal patrols and crazy things like that. And here you can see it in action without the extra, the extra optics on the top. So you can see you literally bolt a front of this, which is like pretty much just a front of a boat, and the back of a boat to it, and Bob's your uncle. The Kami is ready to go. And a lot of people, especially people like Switzerland on the Discord, have talked in length about why not add machines like this. Not so they can take place in naval battles, but we do have maps, such as the remade Kuban, or even Port Novorossiysk, which now has ramps for the, the naval area. Why not add machines like the Kami with the additional modification for these float parts, so you could actually use it in a more different way. It would add quite a lot of variety to the game. It would, and I don't think it's a mechanic that has to be shared across everyone, because to be honest, the mechanic wouldn't be very good. We already have it in game in the form of amphibious stuff, but we don't see it used to a greater level. It would be lovely to see a map at some point which does use, amphibious stuff to a greater degree. And it's kind of sad to see that it's not, it might be being worked on, but to me that means that it's not going to be here at least in a year or even more, where the mechanic itself is really cool. The amphibious idea is really great, and I don't think it's been used to great effect in War Thunder yet. I'm kind of waiting for that map to really put it on the map as a mechanic to be cool. Now we move on to aircraft. So the first one is an obvious one. The T2 is a very powerful aircraft in game right now, and every other nation can't really match it. Do you have plans for better counterparts like the British-French Jaguar, which is very similar? The answer: we plan to introduce contemporaries and more modern aircraft for other nations in the game. This isn't a surprise when you have a look at machines which have been passed to the developers. Basically, they've passed on the Serpicat Jaguars, the French versions, and also the British versions. They've also there was that F8 which got leaked. The model of it, one of the. Well, I wouldn't put it like that. But yeah, the F8 or the F4, is it the F4 Crusader or the F8 Crusader? Whatever that American Vietnam jet is, you know what I'm on about. And there's been a bunch of other ones which have also been passed on when it comes to aircraft, so I'm pretty sure Gamescom will have a bunch of these new jets which are going to compete with the T2. The issue, as I've said many times, is the T2 is in this weird bracket of like 1.8, 1.8 Mach, where a lot of nations either went from 0 to 2, or they went from like around 1 to 2. So a nation that went from like 0 to 2 would be someone like Germany. And yes, they have the MiG-19S, yes, I understand, but it's not German. But they went from 0 to 2. The British also went from 0 to 2. The Italians technically didn't, but they pretty much did as well. So there was this large jump to around 2.2, 2.4, stuff like that. And the issue is, are we just going to see a scenario in game where you're just going to keep getting more and more power creep? And technically, that's what aviation design has been in the modern era for a long time. So are you just okay with that, or should they do something about it, or should we try and create contemporaries, or should it just be whoever has the best aircraft? Everybody plays it, kind of like what we have with the T2 now and what we had with the Canadair Sabre before. A lot of people bringing up the Jaguars as counters to the T2. I don't think they are. I've never really thought that they are, because the Jaguars are ground pounders. I understand, like, a lot of people are looking at the speed, they're looking at the gun, and they're looking at what it can carry, but what I'm worried about with the Jaguar is the lack of radar that some of the variants had, and also the fact that even in combat zones where there wasn't, they pretty much had air dominance, they had to be escorted by mirages, not just for the radar, but also to protect themselves. So for me, when I look at the Jaguars, I find it very hard to believe that they're a counter to the T2. But then again, we'll have to see them in game. It would sort out two nations, Britain and France, which are not really struggling for, you know, those types of aircrafts, especially if you go by the logic of what I said before, where you just add like a Lightning in instead of a contemporary to a T2. But as I said, I think at Gamescom will be like it will show us you know, some cool stuff when it comes to this. The next question is, do you have any further plans for any more of the Hawker Hunter variants? We do not have any more current plans regarding this aircraft. I mean, they did just add in, you know, the most popular, most iconic version of the Hunter, and also, you know, they've had the other Hunter version in the game. I think it would be much better to focus on other aircraft such as the Gnat, such as the Vixen, the Sea Vixen, such as the Lightning, you know, if you want to power creep it. So I would. The thing is, there's a lot of options for Britain when it comes to Mach, Mach 0.8, 0.9 aircraft, and also Mach 2. So I would love to see those options explored more than a Hawker Hunter, since they're just going to act very similarly to the two which are either in game right now. Do you still have plans to continue updating older aircraft models like you have previously done with the Ju-87, HE-111, F4U, Hurricane and Spitfire series as some examples? The answer is, we have no immediate plans in the very near future, but we periodically update models and don't exclude the possibility of any further models being updated. When the Spitfires were updated, it was a wonderful day. When the Hurricanes were updated a little bit before that, it was also a wonderful day. The HE-111s and the Ju-88s, my god, was the update great. But I have a contender for something that needs to be updated, and it needed to be updated a year ago. And that is, of course, the big brothers, the big boys of World War II, the B-17s. The B-17s, and understand, right now I'm running on Global Players Poll, what is that? I am running on medium graphics, but even on movie settings, the B-17s do not look good. These are not good-looking aircraft. They're very chunky. You can see even in these areas they have a lot of lines which are incredibly angled. And if you ever have seen like somebody try and make a movie out of these, like a War Thunder cinematic, what you'll find is people try and use the B-29 instead of the B-17s because it actually looks real. Whereas this doesn't. It looks like it's out of a computer game. And one of the things that War Thunder has done amazingly well, which is why you can produce some screenshots which look like historic screenshots, which is why when you see good War Thunder cinematics, it looks absolutely astonishing. And sometimes, with a little bit of editing, you can make it look like actual military footage. There's a reason why that is, because the models in game and the way that they fly are incredibly good and can be, used in a way which makes it, which makes it a situation where you can reproduce footage from years ago. But the B-17s are just not that. The B-17s are in a bad place. When it comes to game balance and also when it comes to what they look like in game. And it would be nice to see, since it isn't just the B-17s that you have to think about, it's also the fact that there's a bunch of decals and roundels and insignias which are tied to these B-17s as well, if I can find them. Well, there is a bunch of stuff which is, tied to them, which you would like to get, but the problem is the fact that they're not very nice. They're not very good-looking planes anymore. They're actually quite bad-looking planes. And it would be nice if they got an update. I'll just put it like that. To me, that all of the updates that they've done to vehicles such as the Ju-88, the HE-111, the Spitfires, they've all been wonderful. There hasn't been a bad update. And I feel like the B-17s require one, just because of their iconic status and just because of, what they are when it comes to cinematics and stuff like that. As a fan of cinematics, it's kind of sad not seeing a lot of bomber ones because, well, they don't look great. The next one is, why is there a laser designator on the Mi-35-24B and FJ-4B? AT gems fly pretty correctly without it. The presence of a laser designator on these vehicles is an error, and it will be fixed in an upcoming future update. Well, that's good, isn't it? God damn. How do you plan to develop... Oh, this is helicopters, by the way. The first question is, how do you plan to develop helicopter enduring confrontation, or is the current implementation final? We always try to develop game modes, so helicopter enduring confrontation is not an exception, but it is too early to speak about such changes, so just follow the news. Hopefully, it's kind of similar to the other enduring confrontation, where we see more of a mobile battlefield. What I mean by this is more units moving around, whether it be supplies, whether it be trains, whether it be paratroopers, you know, all that stuff. And I understand on a a modern combat kind of sense where helicopters are, a lot of these things don't make sense, but they would give you, if you pick the ones which do make sense, you could easily pick some areas which would enhance the gameplay quite a lot and mean that, you know, you can have much more of a fun time with it. And I think that just a battlefield which is more maneuverable is the way to go. I know always will be. I'd just like to thank B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Reinman, Leonard Rudnick, Martinez, Matati, Moxie, Nick Graham, Alobrilo, Super Cacti, Elove Goats, and Seductive Trashcan for supporting the channel.